Thank you, Scott. Yeah, so part of this was the topic of organizational health came up prior to the conference. And we're doing something called AgilityHealth, which really speaks to organizational health and especially health within the Agile team. So I thought it was a good idea to share some of the stuff we've been doing, and we'll get right into it. So a little bit background. So what is this Cox Automotive thing? So you guys might know Cox Cable. So what is this Cox Automotive thing? How does KBB fit in? People are still confused about where I work. So Cox Automotive is basically a group of companies in the automotive space that's been formed a little over a year ago. KBB, Kelley Blue Book, is one of the companies in there. Other household names like Auto Trader you might see here. And we recently had some new additions in the family. Dealer.com and DealerTrack joined us. And so for me personally, it was really just almost like zooming out. I started with a smaller company, and now looking out from 450 people became 30,000. And from, I don't know, 20 or so Scrum teams, now the universe actually consists of 180 Scrum teams that I know of in the domestic space, not even to get into international. So it's a pretty big group. And last time I checked, pretty much everybody is doing Agile, which is really cool. And so that's kind of our playing field here. And what is this Agile enablement thing? So that's my new role. I was founded a little over a year ago. It's at the Cox Automotive level. And what we're trying to do is to enable. We're not doing governance. We're not telling people this is how you shall do Agile. It's about making things easier, change management, assisting and helping. And so with that, we want to promote using Agile to deliver business value in a predictable or responsive fashion, depending on the flavor of the organization. Assisting new teams get up and running with Agile. We want to help establish teams, because that's just the first part of the journey to kind of go Agile, right? You need to consistently continue to improve, so we're helping with that. And scaling becomes a big issue, right? You can't be 180 individual teams and nobody's talking to each other, so there needs to be a way for us to organize within each business unit and across. And we want to promote business agility. We've probably all seen cases where we're doing Agile just within the team level in IT and development, but the rest of the organization doesn't want anything to do with it. And that would be bad, right? So we want to optimize the whole, not just the development organization. So that's Agile enablement. So here's what we're offering. So internally, we're offering coaching and consulting, training. We're going to talk about AgilityHealth. We're helping with tooling. Version 1 is actually one thing we're helping a number of our folks with. We have other ALMs as well, though, doing vendor management and communities of practice. We recently just had an Agile Open conference just within Cox Automotive in Austin, which was great. So what is this AgilityHealth thing, and what is this magical radar? So first, why do we even need this, right? Because we wanted to answer the question, how healthy are our teams really? What are we doing there? And health, we know, is important because it affects the quality and quantity of what we're delivering, affects morale and retention, and it's a competitive workplace. If people aren't happy, chances are they're going to look elsewhere. And we know health is a little bit more esoteric than just measuring a team's velocity, right? There's a lot about the culture and other elements that are very hard to measure. And historically, if your Scrum Masters are doing this, not all do, they might do a spider chart here or there, do a smiley face, but if you're looking at 180 teams, how do you really know how you're doing? So at scale, it's just not possible to do it in this way. And so I came across this thing called AgilityHealth at the big Agile conference last year. It's a product, it's a software product as well as a methodology. Company is Agile Transformation. They put this out, and here's their tagline. They're basically saying this is an Agile assessment and organizational growth tool to help companies improve how they're doing with Agile. And most definitely, there's a lot of focus on the team level itself. But one of the benefits that we're starting to see is you can start layering and kind of zooming out and still do this at scale. So you're learning about how our business unit's doing and how is the overall enterprise doing from an Agile perspective, which is really cool. And so I was really intrigued by this, and I'll show you a little bit about how this works. So it starts with a strategic retrospective. So you're bringing in a facilitator that's trained in this process, in this tool. You're doing a 2.5 hour or so, sometimes 3 or 3.5 actually is required, strategic retrospective, in which the team goes through, answers a bunch of questions, and what comes out of this, among other things, is this guy. So it's a little bit hard to read the details maybe, but you see the major sections. You have clarity, performance, leadership, culture, and foundation. So those are the key elements of what we think a healthy agile team should be looking at. And then within that, you have different subsections. And so if you wanted to zoom in, you can do that. So basically, the team would then look at their health radar. That's what we call this. And it'll give you, now with this view, these outer dimensions that get a little bit more specific about how the teams are doing. And so the team sees this in real time as they go through the facilitated session. And then I'll get into some of the other outputs of this process later. But let's take an example. Let's look at clarity, for example. So hopefully you guys can read this in the back. So just to talk through this. So we think that having clarity as a Scrum team is important. Why? Because you want to know what the vision is for the team, what you're supporting the organization with. How is success measured? I don't know if I'm successful if I don't know how success is defined. Do I have clarity on the roadmap? That's the long-term stuff we're building. Or am I just working on the next sprint and I have no idea where I'm going, right? So you can see where if you're scoring high in these areas, so to speak, it would help the team be healthy and effective. If you're driving in the fog in this case and you only have short-term visibility, that's going to be a problem. Do you know the roles in the team? And are you generalizing specialists, or is everybody just doing, hey, I'm doing QA, you're an analyst, and you're a developer, and don't bother me, right? So this is just one of the dimensions of health as an example of the outputs of this process. The next thing you can look at, and this is also very useful, this is the same team here. So you see all the scattering going on here. Those are the individual votes. Why is this meaningful? Well, you might have some areas where there is consensus. So in this case, this is the confidence of the product owner. You're measuring how confident is your product owner in the team's delivery. Well, the good news is, well, but while there's maybe 3 apparently, they're pretty confident in what's being delivered. On the other hand, if you look at process improvement, another subdimension, people are all over the place. So maybe that's an indication, maybe we're not doing that great in that area. Maybe we're not focusing on our retrospectives. Maybe there is some challenges there. And some people apparently are a little bit disgruntled here, so they're really low on that score. And so you can probably see that if you had this for your teams, it gives you a good 360 of what's going on inside the team and how they're doing. Then you're getting into multi-teams. So this is now, you go ahead and do this across a number of teams, and you can create groupings, programs, portfolios, your whole organization. As long as it doesn't get too busy, you can do this on the chart. So this is the view across a portfolio of teams that work together. So you can see kind of the common patterns across the different teams. And you, in theory, could slice and dice this by role, by location, by there's something called a group of people, so you can actually take different perspectives and see, hey, our architecture people are super happy, QA seems to be quite unhappy, and those kinds of things, without exposing individual responses. But you can do a lot of interesting analysis. You can look at Scrum versus Kanban, how we're doing on predictability, for example. Very powerful stuff. So a little bit more on the process. So we talked about kind of this inner circle a little bit. So we're going through an assessment with the team, and that's led by folks we call AHFs, AgilityHealth facilitators. So they're going in, they're doing this retro. And the other output of this process is like a regular retro. You're looking at strengths, weaknesses, there's textual responses, and you're defining growth items. Growth items could be for the team. Hey, as a team, we need to work on communication, or we're not focusing on continuous improvement, or who knows, some technical practices. But the even more important output is organizational growth items. And that's something that Scrum doesn't really solve for, right? So if, as a team, you don't have the right environment, the right facilities, or the right hardware infrastructure across the organization to support development effectively, in Scrum, as soon as it goes beyond the team, it's very hard to find somebody to actually resolve this type of stuff, because the team is not empowered to solve for these things themselves. So what happens here is you're entering into this outside loop here. So the inside loop is the teams doing these assessments. We're hoping once a quarter is kind of the target. But the real value, I think, comes by looking at what are the organizational growth items where the teams say, hey, we need help with these things, and we are not ourselves empowered to solve for it. We need better facilities, better workspaces, better something. And then we're hoping to form leadership teams that ultimately take the output from multiple of those teams and then sit down and say, okay, here's a common theme. These 10 things come up from all the teams I'm responsible for. How can we help them? And then ultimately treat it as like a backlog, right? You're doing this every quarter. You have these 10 items that seem to be coming up all the time. Then forming a group of people around this that says, okay, we're owning this. As a leadership group, you need to maybe pick the highest value items, the top 3 or 5 from this. And in this quarter, we're committing to working on this and resolving this. So then you're getting into this outside circle where you have a quarterly improvement sprint, if you will, at the leadership level. And this creates a structure that Scrum doesn't have, a mechanism for you to deal with these bigger, trickier organizational items from an improvement perspective. A little bit on our rollout. So I've always been told I'm putting too much text on my slides, so I'm going to go really easy on this one. So we did a pilot. When we heard about this, we said, okay, let's try this with a few teams. And we looked at the output of that, and we said, let's go do this. Okay, it's the short version. Did some surveys. People really enjoyed the process. And so what we've done is, I mentioned these facilitators, and we thought because we're so spread out, it's important to have these in the major places where we have development and have local people that have relationships in these different business units. So we've gone ahead and sent out folks for certification. It's a one-day class. Just get familiar with the tool, the process, the do's and don'ts. There's don'ts as well, such as don't punish people based on the results of the radar, because then you don't get candor the next time. So we got people certified. So we have now 19 people in the organization across different business units that can actually help with this. And we're looking at some other business units to jump onto that as well. And I think it's been good to have these folks, and we're kind of out of the center, kind of guiding them a little bit. But what's really meaningful to me is when you ask people about the process, this is kind of the feedback you're getting. So it's not just something, hey, corporate has another idea or something, and we need to go through this. Initially, there might be a little bit, okay, why we're 2.5 hours? That's a lot of time where I'm not developing or coding. What's going on here? But if you ask people afterwards, it's actually fascinating, because more often than not, you're running out of time in the 2.5 hours because you have so much valuable discussion that you actually need more time. And here's some of the feedback, which is people enjoying the process, people learning something new about themselves, maybe stuff they stopped talking about because they just took it for granted. It's more thorough than a regular retrospective. And you start seeing patterns that you can now address, and items that come out organizationally that you can help the teams with, and where usually there might not be a good mechanism to deal with them. So this is encouraging. Just had somebody a week ago come into my office and says, "Oh, I'm a facilitator. This is really great. The teams were really embracing this, and couldn't say enough about how I enjoyed the process." I'm like, "That's cool." So some of our next steps are really, so we've kind of gone and done all the assessments for the most part through all the different teams. Now it's about the outer circle, the organizational stuff, building leadership teams that ultimately digest the organizational growth items, and getting into the quarterly outside sprint. So this is the first time we're doing this, so a little experimental. A little bit different, I'm sure, in every business unit, because we have different sizes, different business models, different flavors. But that's, I think, where a lot of the value is. And this is how we're going to be successful if we're able to show to the teams, hey, you identified something that you need help with. here's what we're doing about it. Example, we had one business unit that was struggling with development managers also being Scrum Masters. And guess what? This thing manifested very quickly that, yeah, this is not working for that organization. And they've actually taken this, and the rumors were going around before, but there was really no hard data to look at. Now that they got this data point, they actually then took action based on that and say, okay, let's bring in actual people that have that skill set, or at least dedicate people to the Scrum Master role. So they've taken tangible action based on the output of this. So that's one example where if you action these things, you can actually really move the organization forward, hopefully, and make improvements. So with that, this is the famous last slide. Wanted to see if there was any questions on this.
Yeah, how frequently do you expect to be conducting this assessment, and these 18 AHFs, are they full-time dedicated to that role?
So good question. So we're trying to stick with quarterly. It's a little bit ambitious because it takes time away. These are initially volunteers. They're not doing this full-time. They're basically, we went out and said, this is what this can do for you. Who are the right people that can help with this? And we've gotten people. It's not their full-time job, so we're hoping to do this quarterly. I guess the fallback would be maybe every 6 months, but we definitely don't want to let this drag on any longer.
Do you do this remotely? Do you have remote teams like India or some other country that you have to worry about?
Not as far as I'm aware of. There's a little bit sprinkling of remote going on. It's an external company really that we've tasked, but they're mostly they're not fully fledged agile teams building features. They're more like, it's a little funky, let's say QA. Okay. Yeah, so we're not doing that right now, but I know other companies I've heard of that are doing this remotely, even though maybe the first time you want to go out there for this, the next time they can maybe do this through video or other means. But you still, I think the value is you don't want to just throw the survey out and you do this completely offline. Really the value comes from the conversation. Like you can't do a regular retrospective without talking to each other, right? So you need the interaction with the team for sure. If that means you send somebody there, or you have a mechanism to bring people together virtually, you definitely want the conversation.
So the chart that you came up with, was that created from the 2.5 assessment retrospective? Because it's a lot of data points to collect in, looks to me like in 2.5 hours, or is it a questionnaire that they fill in, or how does it work? So
it's a facilitated session. So the facilitator walks them through the different dimensions and also gives examples. This is what good looks like. This is what terrible looks like. So if you have a product owner that's engaged, this is what you would expect, and here's never seen the guy. So people kind of know what the scale is, so they don't just randomly say, oh, we're doing good, but they know they're being told what good is. So they're maybe spending the first 30 minutes answering questions either on their phones or on their laptops. Okay. But the rest of the meeting is really the conversation around what's the output of this? How can we improve? How can we help ourselves, or where do we need organizational help? And that's the rest of the time.
I'd just like to comment that I really like this approach. I've seen it before, but what I like about it is it helps to socialize what Agile really means, what good Agile will look like. And I have found in organizations that I've been to is that everybody has a different concept of what Agile looks like. And so this type of tool helps get everybody on the same page with their understanding of what that should be, or what we're trying to strive for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. You're basically describing the baseline, and then you have more comparable data.
Real quick question. How far into your Agile transformation do you think it would be appropriate to run the very first survey as a benchmark?
It's a great question. I think there's value in having a baseline early on. So I would say once you get up and running with the team, maybe a sprint or two in, you're very young in your journey, maybe that's actually a great point to, you don't want to do this when you're still doing waterfall, that wouldn't make too much sense, right? But I think early on, once you at least get the concepts of it, might make sense, and you can do trending over time, and I think it'll help you chart your course for the teams and the organization and see how you're improving.
All right, we're going to hold off. Feel free to pester Rene throughout the rest of the day, if he is willing to do this. Let's give a hand for Rene. Thank you for doing that.